Hello. I have these late night thoughts that I feel like aren't meant to be kept to myself, so I'm just gonna put them out there and hopefully they land where they land. I'm talking about psychological pathology and how do we get people back to a psychological homeostasis or a set point for psychological conditions. It's kind of long, so it's gonna be a couple different parts to this video. If you use PTSD as an example, there's a traumatic event. Um, the traumatic event triggers the amygdala to trigger the hypothalamus to release epinephrine. There's an action in the body. The hypothalamus triggers the pituitary to trigger the adrenal glands to release cortisol. There's a resulting action in the body. Most things in the body work off of feedback loops to keep the body at homeostasis or at a specific set point for whatever the function is. An example of a feedback loop that's meant to fix a an error or a certain negative effect in the body, but it actually ends up speeding up the negative problem, pushing you closer to death, is hypovolemic shock, right? Um, Trauma is sustained, you lose too much blood, your body is trying to correct it, but the very functions it's doing to correct it actually, you know, potentially push you closer to or push you away from survival. So with psychological responses, how do we measure the set point? How do we tune the body back to its set point, back to homeostasis for each condition? With hypovolemic shock, we stop the cause, we stop the bleeding, and then we correct the loss of fluid by replacing fluid amongst, other things. But that's kind of the basic principle. But how do we do that with mental health? Have we identified each initial trigger variable? Have we stopped that cause? And then how do we return the error back to its set point? In depression, for example, we use things like SSRIs. You get increase in serotonin, so that the resulting effect is happiness, I guess. But many people still dip back to that unhealthy low or that unhealthy sadness. So my thought this morning specifically were like spectrums in psychology. I never understood how autism could be a spectrum. I felt like you were either autistic or you weren't. But I think the reality is, many things are a spectrum. You can use, you know, happiness, sadness, depression, anxiety, bipolar. Uh, Many people can be inattentive or they can be hyperactive, but they usually go back to a set point, as opposed to people who have ADHD. They can't generally get back to that set point, or that baseline. So what keeps people away from their set point? Why does spirituality or meditation return people back to their set point, and how does it do that? And even speaking from experience, becoming more spiritual in the last year, I feel like it helped me tremendously, but it still, uh, you know, puts me back, um, or I get back into, slumps, I guess you would call them. But what's the mechanism behind that? And then, if I pray or I meditate, I can get back to that set point, but it doesn't stay there. Have we studied that? We are doing studies on psychedelics. Hopefully we get some good results from that. It's obviously doing something. Are the effects similar to prayer and meditation? Um, we have done studies on meditation, right? Um, we've done all kinds of crazy studies on consciousness, but I don't feel like the treatments reach anyone. But with meditation, we know it induces neuroplasticity. It reduces amygdala reactivity. It improves neurotransmitter levels. So why is the standard of care in most places just therapy and pills? We have unimaginable technology, but psychology is stuck like in the 1980s. It just doesn't make sense to me. If you think of the body metaphorically as a radio that can be tuned, how do we set the knob back to the right station and keep it there? What part of the body is the knob? Is it the amygdala? Is it the hypothalamus? Some say the pineal gland is a receiver. So is there something wrong with the receiver, or is there something wrong with the signal? Just a couple of other, I believe, somewhat related, but people would consider them woo-woo thoughts. But we are frequency beings, and there are frequency treatments for some things. So, can we apply those to get people back to a psychological baseline? You can apply frequency to water, and it can hold frequency, or display different frequencies like in a container. It can resonate at frequencies. Our bodies are mostly water. Our blood is mostly water. Could the pyramids have been resonant chambers, with one of the benefits being mental health stabilization? Just a couple other things. Supposedly fluoride calcifies the pineal gland. Why is fluoride in our water? Many people ask that question, but we don't seem to get any answers besides it prevents cavities. Did you know hydroxyapatite can protect against cavities? Why isn't that used more commonly? Just questions. These are all thoughts that come to my head.